How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 2.
Hello there. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here across the United States. The phone number is 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program. I had a funny thing happen yesterday. So I have been critical of the Pentagon's new media rules. And a listener of this program came after me on social media yesterday because of a post Sean Davis, I think, from The Federalist had put up about those media rules. And essentially the guy told me I was lying. And my response to him was our Fox News and Newsmax and the Washington Times and the Washington Examiner line, because one person on the internet says they're wrong. Are they wrong because you trust the one person? And I know and like Sean, but I disagree with him on this issue. Eric Wimple actually breaks down the rules from the Pentagon and why I think the Pete Hegseth has bitten off more than he can chew here. Let me just give you an example of this. The old rule for the media. This is the existing rule. 1, building passes must be visible and worn above the waist at all times while in the Pentagon. 2, lost passes should be immediately reported. 3, be alert for suspicious activity and immediately report any unusual activity and or circumstances to the Pentagon Force Protection Agency. 4, ensure office doors are locked and property is secured while exiting your office. 5, I understand that everyone entering the building is subject to random inspection. 6, I understand that a property pass is required to remove property from the building that is not readily identifiable as personal. Property passes may be obtained during normal working hours. 7, Pentagon Force Protection Agency authorizes media members who are U.S. citizens access to the Pentagon 24 hours a day and affords escort privileges for visiting media members from the same media outlet who possess appropriate credentials. 8, Pentagon Force holders escorting other media members must stay with their visitor at all times. 9, I understand that Pentagon Force Protection Agencies, the people are extended as a courtesy to media members who work full-time in the Pentagon and who visit at least 3 times a month. Or rather, I understand that credentials are extended as a courtesy. 10, I have been briefed on the security requirements and abide by the provisions of the above. So you have access to the building. There, you can't take anything out of the building unless it's your personal property. You must be escorted at certain times, and there are parts of the building you're not allowed to go in. That's it. It's one-page paper. The new rules are 21 pages long. 21 pages. One of the things that he expressed concern about is reporters walking around the building unescorted. Yep, I would say I have a concern. And so now in this general security provision says members of the news media do not possess a legal right to access the Pentagon. Rather, such access is a privilege subject to the discretion of government authorities and is regulated by federal law and Department of War policy. Legally, the press has no greater right of access than the public. While members of the news media may be granted access under certain conditions, this is a privilege extended by the government and not a constitutionally protected right. Now they've got new badges. If the news media require access to certain portions of the Pentagon for in-person interviews, they've got to be escorted to and from the places. Civilian employees or contractors, members of the news media, are not required to submit their writings to the Department of War for approval. However, they should understand that Department of War personnel may face adverse consequences for unauthorized disclosures. Also, by the way, you can't talk to people without prior permission now. Here's one of the big sections here. Let me just read you Eric Wimple's commentary on it. These new lines present a particularly troubling set of problems for Pentagon correspondents and their news organizations because they target journalistic inquiry. Reporters ask for information all the time and in many different ways. What is the difference, for example, between the new policy called solicitation and a journalist asking what's going on in the Secretary's office? Tim Parlatore, a special advisor to Pete Hegseth, said the stricture applies only when the journalist crosses the line to asking defense officials to violate criminal statutes. But that's not actually what it says. The receipt of unsolicited information and its subsequent publication is generally protected by the First Amendment and would not on its own normally trigger denial, revocation, or non-renewal of a Pentagon press badge. However, if you solicit the disclosure of such information or otherwise encourage Department of War personnel to violate laws and policies concerning the disclosure of certain information, such conduct may weigh in consideration of whether you pose a security or safety risk. There is a critical distinction between lawfully requesting information from the government and actively soliciting or encouraging government employees to break the law. The First Amendment does not permit journalists to solicit government employees to violate the law by providing confidential government information. And on it goes. Here's the problem. What if you don't? What if they offer it to you? Many times there are lots of leaks inside the Pentagon that come from unsolicited reporters. The sources within the Pentagon go to the reporters. Well, based on this, the reporters, by publishing it, could lose their access to the Pentagon, even though the individual reporters didn't solicit it. We've gone from one page to 25 pages. What the defenders of the policy now are saying is this is all about access to the building, that you don't have free range to roam the building. You know, they've never had access, contrary to what the claim is, they've never actually had access in the past to roam the whole building. There are certain areas of the Pentagon, if you don't know, if you look at a diagram of the Pentagon is a series of, for lack of a better word, rings, even though they're in the shape of a Pentagon. And they're A, B, C, D, E, the rings of the Pentagon. And you have a series of corridors within those rings that you're not supposed to go. And that's always been the case. And what the Pentagon, what the proponents of this now argue is that, well, we're just restricting access of where you can go and who you can talk to. You shouldn't be able to bother people, and that would be fine. But as implemented, the way it's actually read gives a lot broader power to the government than they've ever had before. And while I certainly think that the press can abuse the information, while I certainly believe that the press can overstep the bounds, essentially the way this is broadened is if you, a reporter, do a story based on sources at the Pentagon that the Secretary of Defense doesn't like, you can get booted from the building as a potential threat to national security. Now, before you Republicans rush to defend Pete Hegseth on this, what if the next Secretary of Defense comes in and is a Democrat and says, "Yep, we're gonna apply the same thing," and when Fox News reports on something that has happened with a woke Joint Chiefs based on sources from the Pentagon, we're going to boot that guy because he talked to sources who are in the Pentagon who are unhappy with the woke Joint Chiefs, and we're going to boot them. The current policy has worked just fine. The needless antagonism, and I think that's probably my larger problem here. One, it's not necessary. Two, it does provide way too much breadth. And for those of you who are like, no, I read in the Federalist or I ran at OAN, Newsmax and Fox News and Real Clear Politics and the Washington Examiner and the Washington Times, all of which are unimpeachably conservative, have said they're not going to comply either. They're simply not going to comply, and they're not going to participate. And I'm sorry that if you, for some reason, bizarrely think that that we should defend Pete Hegseth and everything he does, and you've got major conservative outlets saying, nope, can't do it. You got Brett Baer saying this is a bridge too far. I'm sorry, but your willingness to defend indefensible is no better than the left's willingness to defend the indefensible on their side. And you're not an intellectually honest person. You're just you're a tribal follower. You're not even a leader. You're a follower. And the problem here is this for the president. There is clearly an uptick in activity off the coast of Venezuela. And there is clearly an uptick in the blowing up of boats leaving Venezuela. And there are people, including those inside the military, who believe that these are drug operations that are not an active war operation, but a criminal operation. All major press outlets from left to right have now walked out of the Pentagon. They refuse to comply with this new policy. Who do you think they're going to be getting their stories from? They're not going to stop covering the Pentagon. Who do you think we're going to get the stories from now? We're going to get the stories from the people who really believe that there is unconstitutional action happening in the Caribbean. We're going to get the story from the people who don't like the president. We're going to get the story from the deep state sources. All Pete Hegseth has done is now allowed the amplified voices of the deep state who don't like this administration to begin to sabotage this administration as it begins to reinforce the Monroe Doctrine in the Western Hemisphere. Because you're going to get the military sources. If the press doesn't sign this 21-page document, the Pentagon sources are not going to talk to them on the record. The only people who are going to talk are off the record, and those people are going to be people with access to grind against the president. And so what Pete Hegseth and the Pentagon have done, they've now structured a press relationship that is designed to make this administration look bad at a time this administration has changed military policy in the Caribbean for the better, at a time this administration has decided to treat the narco traffickers as not criminals, but as people at war with the United States. A major shift in American policy is happening right now, and along comes Pete Hegseth to say, you know what, we're not going to talk to you guys in the press anymore unless you sign this document that fundamentally changes how you've operated inside the Pentagon for the last 50 years. And Fox News and Newsmax and the Washington Examiner and the Washington Times and Real Clear Politics, which have great conservative reporters, are all saying, we're not signing this. Neither is the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN or NBC or ABC or CBS or PBS. It's not just outlets on the left, it's outlets on the right. They're all saying, other than OAN and a couple of conservative bloggers, everybody else is saying, nope, we're not going to sign this. So the propagandists, the actual conservative propagandists are signing it. The actual journalistic institutions of the left and the right are saying, we're not going to sign it. So who are their sources going to be? If the Pentagon's not going to talk to you, if you're not going to sign the document, the only people who are going to talk to you are the people with access to grind against Donald Trump. Pete Hegseth, by taking a one-page document and turning it into a 21-page document full of legalese and restrictions that they've never had before, has now amplified the voices of the deep state who hate Donald Trump at a time the president is fundamentally shaking up American military policy in the Caribbean. And so the American people are going to learn from people who have access to grind on background about those policies, and it's fundamentally going to undermine what is actually a very good policy of the president, but it's going to undermine it because Pete Hegseth has now structured a relationship with the press that has become toxic because he's demanding of them essentially control of their editorial process. It's not just, contrary to what the conservative propagandists say, about where they can go in the building. It's who they can talk to, when they can talk to them, how they can talk to them, and what stories they can report. And when Fox News and Newsmax and the Washington Times and the Washington Examiner and Real Clear Politics say, this is too far for us, this is not about the left-wing media. This is about getting you fair and accurate stories. Pete Hegseth sought to shape the narrative, and he is now ensured it's going to be shaped by the people who hate the president. I have some breaking news for all of you. That's right. I have breaking news. I shall read for you what the President of the United States has just put on social media. I have just concluded my telephone conversation with President Vladimir Putin of Russia, and it was a very productive one. President Putin congratulated me and the United States on the great accomplishment of peace in the Middle East, something that, he said, has been dreamed of for centuries. I actually believe that the success in the Middle East will help in our negotiation in attaining an end to the war with Russia-Ukraine. President Putin thanked the First Lady, Melania, for her involvement with children. He was very appreciative and said that this will continue. We also spent a great deal of time talking about trade between Russia and the United States when the war with Ukraine is over. At the conclusion of the call, we agreed that there will be a meeting of our high-level advisors next week. The United States' initial meetings will be led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio together with various other people to be designated. A meeting location is to be determined. President Putin and I will then meet in an agreed-upon location in Budapest, Hungary, to see if we can bring this inglorious war between Russia and Ukraine to an end. President Zelensky and I will be meeting tomorrow in the Oval Office, where we will discuss my conversation with President Putin and much more. I believe great progress was made with today's telephone conversation. That is the President of the United States announcing he has spoken with Vladimir Putin and will travel to Budapest in Hungary to meet with Vladimir Putin to discuss peace in Ukraine. He will be meeting with President Zelensky in the Oval Office tomorrow. See if he can keep on a roll bringing peace to the world. Now, let me bring peace to you in your business operations. If you're frustrated with your managed IT service, you can talk to Vision Computers and you'll be talking to real people, not AI chatbots. Anybody nationwide can take advantage of this. Call them at 404-COMPUTE or go to visioncomputers.com. Tell them I sent you. Call them at 404-COMPUTE and say I sent you. Save a little more money. Vision Computers is headquartered in Atlanta, but it doesn't matter. They work with companies all over the nation. Your employees actually get a special phone number they call. They don't have to do AI chatbots and email tickets when they got computer problems. They pick up the phone, and in 15 seconds or less, they get an answer to their needs faster than a Google search. Someone answers the phone and helps them. They can even remote in if need be. They can keep you up to date. They can help you with email, printer support, you name it. They're very, very good and very, very reasonably priced. They can save your company some money and keep you online and up to date. And they can also help you if you're in the gig economy, just you, but you need help keeping yourself online and up to date. Vision can help you. Just $199 a year per computer. Tell them Eric sent you. You might save some more money. 404-COMPUTE or visioncomputers.com. What do you have to lose? You're not going to talk to an AI chatbot. You're not going to have to do email tickets. You get a phone number. You call. A person actually answers in 15 seconds or less and helps you. We have Vision with our house, and my gosh, I haven't had to be IT support for my kid in quite a while. 404-COMPUTE. Tell them I sent you. When we come back, the Great Socialist Gathering on CNN. Hello, my friends. It is Eric Erickson here across the United States. Delighted to have you with me. The phone number is 877-973-7425. If you want to be on the program, don't forget to text Eric, ERICK, if you want to be on the program. So the Democrats, they've got their No Kings protest this weekend. And just so you understand, the No Kings protests are actually funded by a number of billionaires around the country. And they have been places for the white woke progressives to go to denounce their fellow countrymen who see the world differently from them. And I want to play you just how defensive they're starting to get here. On Morning Joe this morning, Joe Scarborough and Jeanne Shaheen, the senator from New Hampshire, were defending the No Kings protests. And I found it very funny.
Talking points. Mm-hmm. Talking points where they are trying to call Chuck Schumer and Democratic leaders violent, trying to call Democrats violent. Tom Evers in a press conference called them terrorists. These peaceful protests that happened before. You even had earlier Jonathan Martin talking about how most of them were like the NPR tote bag carrying crowd. But the fact that they're trying to whip people into a frenzy, and especially here we are several weeks after the horrible violence, the tragedy committed against Charlie Kirk, to be calling peaceful protesters, people have already protested last year, peaceful protesters, calling them terrorists, saying they're violent, and proudly. Now, they are...
That's Scarborough. This is Jeanne Shaheen, the senator.
For women's rights, people who were marching against the war in Vietnam, peaceful protests to say we want to exercise what is a foundation of our democracy and our Constitution, the right of freedom to assembly, to peacefully protest if we disagree with the policies of this country, and for the Speaker of the House and other Republican leaders to say that this is all about hating America is a lack of understanding of what America is all about.
We're going to see for ourselves the way this thing plays out, and I just don't think it's going to go well for the Democrats, the stuff that we see. John Fetterman was talking on News Nation. They had an interesting conversation. Last night you had the Socialism Fest on CNN with Caitlin Collins, AOC, and Bernie Sanders. You had John Fetterman and Stephen A. Smith growing his public political profile. This is from the conversation with John Fetterman on News Nation last night, which, interestingly enough, is growing in ratings and continuing to outperform CNN and MSNBC, in large part because the conversations are way more thoughtful and it's way less skewed either left or right.
Well, if you're thinking about winning the election, and so now that's all going to come down to 7 or 8 states. And that's really that matters. And I would like to remind everybody, because we all know that Trump ran the table, all of those kinds of states. And now you can't ever forget, these are the states that are going to determine who's going to be the next administration. And now a lot of the things, the extremism that people turned their back in 24, and that's how we kind of came up short. I campaigned for thousands of miles across Pennsylvania for Vice President Harris. And it was going to be incredibly difficult. You could just feel the energy there. And people really have connected there at a very fundamental level. And that's what I tried to explain to my party. And I'm trying to explain to the party right now. It's like, this is why we lost. And this is where we need to be to continue to win for these things. And there are parts of extreme things emerging clearly on those things. And that's why I refuse to follow that, even if that is going to cost me support in parts of the base.
Do you think Harris could have gotten a deal with Hamas?
You brought up a good point. I think I was the only Democrat early on to give President Trump credit for the peace deal.
Yeah. He was, and extremism is a problem, and yet they're going super extreme now. This is from, before we get to last night on CNN, let me play you this from Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, this morning, talking about what happened last night on CNN.
You saw it. CNN hosts the first socialist town hall where Bernie Sanders and AOC said the quiet parts out loud. They don't know what they want to end the shutdown. They couldn't provide a single viable solution for the mess that they themselves have gleefully created. And by the way, those are the real leaders of the Democrat Party. We all know it. AOC and Bernie. Good luck with that.
Yeah, they really are. And now let me play you some of the Socialist Fest last night. This is the viral clip that has made everybody laugh today.
Rivers in rural areas were on fire because of corporations poisoning the people who lived in those areas. Poor middle-class communities getting poisoned and dumped on by corporations like Deloitte and 3M, pouring chemicals into these places. And they want to call it a Democratic priority.
Deloitte and 3M. Deloitte is an accounting firm, just so you know. I think she meant maybe DuPont or something. I don't know, but she said Deloitte and 3M. She lumped them together. It's an accounting firm. She also said this. You get a load of this one.
And so in order for us to fight back against that, we must be clear about what we believe, have strong beliefs, and also be completely unwilling to bow to that kind of division and stand in solidarity with one another, especially when it is someone whose culture is different from ours or whose background we may not entirely understand, but that we honor, love, and see as our fellow Americans.
Right. Okay. The problem here is she believes Republicans do well online because they view women as inferior and the LGBTQ community as subhuman, and that's why Republicans are doing well online. You want to know why they actually, Bernie Sanders believes Republicans are doing well online? Listen to this.
And appealing to audiences, especially young people like myself, online using social media. Why does Republican messaging on social media seem so much more effective than Democratic messaging? And what can we do about it?
Well, that's a great question. I think the Republicans are effective. They have learned a lot about social media. And by the way, it doesn't hurt that their friends own all of the major social media platforms. You know, Bezos owns Twitter or X. Zuckerberg owns Meta, Facebook, and Instagram. Mr. Ellison is going to own you pretty soon. I think he's going to take over CNN, not to mention CBS. So these guys have, they can use algorithms to help themselves. But to answer your question, look, it gets back to something that I have been talking about, Alexandria, others have been talking about. What does the Democratic Party stand for? And I think messaging becomes easy when you're prepared to stand up and fight the right fights. And what is the right fight? At a time when the top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 93%, and the rich are getting richer while working families are struggling, you tell me what the issue is. And the issue is whether you stand with the working class of this country or with wealthy campaign contributors. And we're seeing more and more Democrats around the country, by the way, beginning to understand that.
But to her-
What's so funny there is for Bernie Sanders to talk about wealthy contributors when the Democrats have the Soroses, they got most of Hollywood. The majority of billionaires in this country actually back the Democratic Party. That is a fact. You can't dispute the fact. And yet they hang on to this bashing of wealthy campaign contributors as if that's why the right is doing well. And, the right does well online because the right is helped by Bezos and by Zuckerberg and by Musk. That's not exactly why the Republicans are doing well. They're just coming to office more normal than the progressives who left Twitter, who fled Twitter to Blue Sky, to their protective bubble. And there's this bit from AOC.
And they are able to radicalize and target and exploit a generation of young boys in particular, away from healthy masculinity and into an insecure masculinity that requires the domination of others who are poorer, browner, darker, or a different gender than them. And that is why they are resonating online, because they are appealing to the most basest and worst parts of human nature to divide.
That's our thoughts on Republicans. And, interestingly enough, CNN panned to the crowd. I wish we had visual radio here so you could see it. They panned to the crowd. Two women. One looked Asian, one Hispanic, and they were just nodding along with AOC. Yes, this is true. Toxic masculinity. You know what? Democrats define essentially any masculinity as toxic. If you're a guy doing guy things, you're toxic. It really, the AOC's view of masculinity is, I do think that the only non-toxic masculine people she finds are the men willing to put tampons in their rectum so they know what it feels like to be a woman of some kind. I think that's really it. If you're not willing to yourself as a man use tampons, you're not actually a good man. You're a toxically masculine. You go to the gym and you lift weights. Remember, MSNBC had that story last year that men who lift weights tend to be Republicans, and the throwing of weights around at the gym is symbolic of the toxic masculinity of the GOP. If you got any testosterone at all, you're bad. You're bad. Now, I do have to play you this clip. This is Caitlin Collins again with Bernie Sanders and AOC jumping in on the question of, is AOC going to challenge Chuck Schumer? This is how it went down.
Something so inane and silly instead of actually worrying about his own constituents who are suffering at the hands of his leadership.
But are you saying that Senator Schumer should not be worried about a primary challenge from you?
I mean,
All right.
no.
Let me jump in on this one. This is what
we're talking about.
It's exactly what we're talking about.
This is what we're
talking about. You have a country
about.
that is falling apart. We had a housing crisis, a healthcare crisis, an education crisis, massive income and wealth inequality, a corrupt campaign finance system, and the media says, "Oh, you're going to run. What are you going to run for?" Nobody cares. She'll run more towards
Nobody cares. It's the House Speaker and President Trump and the Vice President saying it.
Right.
Pardon?
Well, of course, they're saying it to deflect attention away from the real issue.
Exactly.
And here, let me tell you what the real issue is. Let's see if CNN talks about it. We're living in the richest country in the history of the world, right? All right, you tell me why we're the only nation not to guarantee health care to all people, the only nation not to guarantee paid family and medical leave, why we have a $7.25 an hour minimum wage, why we have 800,000 people sleeping out on the street, why we have a president who denies the reality of climate change, why we have oligarchs on top who have more and more power every day. Let's talk about that issue, not her own political future. She'll decide that.
On that note, Senator Sanders, Representative Ocasio-Cortez.
Isn't that not funny? She'll decide that. Let the man speak for you, AOC. That's not toxically masculine at all. The man jumping in for you to answer the question for you. My goodness gracious. That's very funny. And also, maybe there's a reason we're the wealthiest country on the planet. It's because we have a great system that could be better if our current government, including led by President Trump, was more committed to the free market. And the Democrats, of course, have made the healthcare system worse by socializing it more and more. The Democrats have decided to redefine homelessness as urban camping and the unhousedness, and is convinced that they just put these people in a house, they'll be taken care of. The Democrats themselves are unserious about these solutions. The only thing they're serious about is climate change, and the way they want to fix climate change is to make the nation poor. That's the solution Bernie Sanders has for everything. Don't take away his 5 houses, but make everybody else in the country poor. Make the wealthy poor. See, that they're okay having poor people. They don't like having rich people. They want the rich to be a little less rich. They don't actually want the poor to be richer. And you know, by the way, why we don't have a middle class in this country anymore. I actually know the answer. I can look at the government and private sector data, and I can tell you why we don't have a middle class in this country anymore. It's because they're all in the upper middle class. The American middle class has done so well now, many of them have gotten wealthy, and they're no longer classified as middle class. And poor Americans are now wealthier than they've ever been before. And Bernie Sanders looks at the growth of wealth in this country for the poor and the middle class and thinks it's bad because the rich are getting richer. He doesn't actually care about the poor getting richer. He just wants to make the wealthy less wealthy. Hello there. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. I gotta say, I was surprised this got through at the Socialist Roundtable at CNN last night. This is a participant in the roundtable, one of the vetted people allowed into the audience.
Yes. Thank you for your time, Senator. How do you think this shutdown reflects on Chuck Schumer's leadership?
Well, I think it reflects more on Mike Johnson's leadership and President Trump's leadership. This is a leadership which said it's okay to give well, how do you feel? You tell me. Think it's a good idea to give $1 trillion in tax breaks to the richest people in the country and then make massive cuts to health care for working class people?
I think Chuck Schumer has voted for continuing resolutions 13 times in the last 4 years, and he has the opportunity to vote for one again, but he's refusing to come to the table.
I think, look, as I have said,
ambush.
There are 53 Republicans in the Senate, correct?
Yes.
They need 60. What does that mean? It means you have to talk to the other side.
That's not what Senator Sanders' position was when he was in the majority, and there was a government shutdown. Also, one more very telling here from AOC.
Can I ask you on this to follow up? Because you said that it is federal law that people, undocumented immigrants, can't get Medicare, Medicaid, the Obamacare subsidies. Do you believe that should be the law, though? Or do you think undocumented immigrants should have access to federally funded health care?
I believe personally that health care is a human right. I believe that every person should be able to go to the doctor. But I believe that right now, federal law is the federal law. And that absolutely, that U.S. citizens and people who pay into our programs deserve to be covered by these programs. And I mean, once again, I do believe that the federal laws that we have on the books are appropriate.
But if you could choose, do you believe that should be changed?
Pardon?
If you could choose, do you believe that the federal law should be changed?
I don't. I believe in a single-payer healthcare system.
Way to avoid the question there. Way to avoid the question. Don't avoid Old Glory Bank. Go check them out at oldglorybank.com/Eric today. If you're in the market for a bank for you or your kids, for a loved one, they've got good custodial accounts for kids. They're a fully operational bank. They're an online bank. Your kids are going to be great at the technology for it. You can be too. It's very easy. Their app is fantastic. You can deposit cash at 88,000 retail locations around the country with a QR code their app generates. I've got a checking account and a savings account. I got the cheapy ones, the no-fee checking, no-fee savings account. You can get premium accounts that pay interest on the checking account. I get a great interest rate on the savings account. It's oldglorybank.com/Eric. That's where you want to go, oldglorybank.com/Eric. They are conservatives, by conservatives, for conservatives, started with all the debanking threats of the left, buying up shares in banks and pushing out conservatives. They will protect you. They don't care if you want to buy a gun. They're a great bank. And businesses, they're great for businesses too. Very hands-on with business. oldglorybank.com/Eric, oldglorybank.com/ERICK. Member FDIC, equal housing lender. Terms and conditions apply.